This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzo and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours?
Hey, good evening, everybody. It's your old pal, Guardian Enzo, coming to you as always live from beautiful but rainy Kyoto, Japan. I'm here with well, I'm not here with him, but my genial co-host Samu. We're talking about Gachiakuta by Urana Kei, who I believe, am I correct, was a assistant to the Soul Eater mangaka, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
She was, yeah, during Fire Force, yes.
Yes, and she's had a couple one shots, but this is her first serialization, I believe. The story we hear with Gachiakuta, if you're a longtime listener to either even going all the way back to, I think, the video podcast that we did even before this podcast, but the one we did as an LIA special episode, basically before we even started. My Taste is Better Than Yours, which, by the way, is the name of the podcast, which, by the way, I should have said when I did the intro. Gachiakuta is a series we've been talking about for a long time. It's made appearances in our discussions basically since its inception, since we were both reading it from chapter 1. And I think it got recommended by a couple of big name mangaka right from the beginning, if I'm not mistaken. I seem to remember that. But in any event, we were reading it right from the beginning, really enjoying it. And in fact, it found its way into our next big thing episode last year when Samu picked it as one of his next big thing picks. And it was a runner up for me. So it's one we've had our eyes on for a long time. And it's kind of in the news now because it has an adaptation coming up from Bones, which will be airing very shortly, by the time you hear this, very shortly. And it's an adaptation that looks fantastic. Normally, you expect good adaptations from Bones anyway, but this one really, really looks great. It looks like a Heavenly Delusion level. We won't know that till we actually see it, but it looks like it's going to be, even by big studio standards, it looks like it's going to be a really good one. So there's a lot to talk about with Gachiakuta. The story here about a kid named Rudo, who's in his early teens, who lives in the slums, and obviously it's related to our world, but it's not our world. Everyone seems to be poor, or most everyone, but there's a little shadow group of rich people, and the poor scrape by basically the scraps from the rich. And Rudo is falsely accused of murdering his stepfather, and he gets tossed off the edge of the world, and which it turns out to be like a big trash pile down there, and that's supposed to kill him. But once he gets down there, he's still alive, and the cast-off garbage of the human race is down there too, and it's given birth to a species or a group of things called trash beasts, and there's a group of people who exterminate those, and he ends up getting recruited or rescued and then recruited to sort of become part of that group. They're called the Cleaners. And this area down there is called the Pit. So not too subtle with the language there, but that's okay. It works. So before I jump in and we start talking about the series, Samu, do you have any general thoughts about Gachiakuta that you want to share?
Yeah, like you said, we both started reading it from the very beginning, and we've kind of kept in touch about it and like checking in along the way and what we're enjoying. It's always been a fun ride, I feel. We'll get into more specifics of what works and doesn't for us. My main thing is that I think the style of it is what I don't want to say carries it, but the style and the aesthetic is just so strong. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Kei Urano's art style and just the way that she presents everything. Yeah, I think it especially does start off very, very strong. So I'm going to be curious to see if how that translates into the anime and people who haven't experienced it yet. Yeah, if it gives it a nice boost, a nice buzz online.
What has been your feeling about the previews and such for the anime? So, what's your feeling on those?
I mean, it looks very clean. It looks very stylish, and it seems like maybe the sort of adaptation that I and many other people envisioned a title like Sakamoto Days, which was my other
Ah,
big prediction, like one of my other
yep.
picks. When yeah, it seems like it's probably getting the best possible adaptation it realistically could. Yeah, we'll probably touch on it, but like considering how well the manga actually performs, um, is surprising, but I'm also happy because I can see that this is the sort of series that an anime can really bring out the life of it even more.
Yeah, I do think we talk about often with shonen the cool factor. And I definitely think that Gachiakuta has the cool factor, don't you?
Oh, 100%. I think now that you've experienced a certain series, I think that series is kind of the modern progenitor of the shonen cool factor, and I think this series carries through that energy for sure.
Yeah, let's talk about that other series and how it definitely because well before I do that, let me ask you define like in 20 words or less in your own words, what is the shonen cool factor? Without naming a specific series or just as a general description of what it is. Because we both know what it is, but it sometimes can be hard to put these things into words. What is that cool factor for you?
I would say it comes more from, like I say, presentation, visual aesthetic, art, and just how it's put across to the reader. It doesn't actually necessarily need to come down to how cool the logistics of things happening are within the narrative. It's just how that is shown to us.
Right?
Um, and yeah, I think this is a series that makes really good use of manga panels. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
something that is able to use the medium to the most. And if that can translate to the anime as well, then it's sort of like a different shade of that cool factor.
I I was gonna say though, I mean, what comes to mind for me, I don't know if you remember. There's a panel where I don't know, I think around chapter 120 or 125, where Rudo tries coffee for the first time, and I don't know how old Rudo is. I guess he's like 15 at this point, but the expression on his face that she shows in great detail when he tries that cup of coffee. It's such a zero moment. It has no plot importance whatsoever, but it exemplifies the cool factor for me because it's just so hilariously overdrawn the way she draws it. And there are panels like that peppered throughout the story that to me that sort of exemplify. To me the greatest cool factor anime of all time is Fooly Cooly, FLCL, which I know you don't like that much, but to me it has the cool factor beyond it to the nth degree that it has the cool factor. And then and there in fact there is an episode that's drawn as if it were animated manga panels quite consciously, but it has a very manga like quality to it as an anime. And there are some individual, like, I want to call them panels because I don't know what else you'd call it, peppered throughout Fooly Cooly that exemplify that cool factor for me. And I think this is a series that has it. But to acknowledge the elephant in the room, the other series we're talking about is Bleach. And at the time, of course, that I started, and most of the time I had been reading Gachiakuta, I had only read a couple chapters of Bleach, and not for a long time had I read them. And it wasn't until we did the Rurouni Kenshin Bleach double episode that I really sat down and read through like a bunch of chapters of Bleach, like the whole first arc, which was 75 chapters or whatever it is. And I mean, it immediately, I mean, once I got back into Gachiakuta really hard preparing for this, which I've been following it, but kind of off and on a little bit. And then I really had to pick it up when we scheduled this episode. The bleachiness of it just absolutely slaps me in the face. And as, I mean, I'm going to assume now I'm as a diehard Bleach fan, I'm going to assume you see this too, don't you? This is not just me that's seeing this in here.
Oh, definitely. I see it 100%, and I think it's funny now that you can chime in on this because you haven't experienced enough of Bleach to like make that connection. But even considering you've only read what is pretty much the least Bleach-like Bleach arc in terms of like the identity of the series of what it's pretty much known to be. And you both in that episode and here, you've named so many names of which you can feel the influence from Bleach to more modern titles. Um, I think that Bleach translates the most. I would say actually out of the big three, especially on an aesthetic level, to a lot of these series that are like up and coming and have this potential. And yeah, I think it comes from a stylistic presentation level and the cool factor.
Yeah, aesthetic is the right word. Aesthetic is the right word. Gachiakuta has an extremely Bleach aesthetic to it. It is another series that I immediately look at it and say it looks like it was made to be in black and white. And it's now I will say her characters are they're a little bit different than Tite Kubo's characters. More attractive, generally speaking, but they have a little bit. She does like the kind of
Oh,
long,
don't worry,
angular
that will
look.
change in Bleach. That will change.
All right, well, okay. But I think background detail, uh,
Mm,
she does more. She definitely goes for more background detail. She's
yeah.
less Spartan in her in her style, but the overall aesthetic is completely bleachy. And immediately, even before getting Bleach into the conversation, I think we even talked about this when we did the Next Big Thing show. It struck me at the time, Gachiakuta. Nothing against Weekly Shonen, which I mean, I don't think that Shonen Jump is the be all and end all quality wise of shonen magazines by any stretch of the imagination. But in reading Gachiakuta, it struck me immediately that this is a series that would have seemed right at home in Shonen Jump. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. I think I can see it if you don't know anything more and you're just going off what's being presented. I think also because I can see the influence of being Atsushi Ookubo's assistant, who is also
Mm.
like a magazine returnee, like veteran at this point, because I can see that aesthetic similarity from that side as well. To me, it also kind of has an identity as a Weekly Shonen magazine title, but yeah, for sure. I think maybe what is different slightly from Jump compared to Weekly Shonen magazine and then Weekly Shonen Sunday is also a little bit different, is that, fun enough, I feel like Jump embraces um, up and comers and like maybe those who haven't even fully refined their style yet, and they don't maybe have as much polished artwork compared to when you see these new titles come from magazine, even when it's relative newbies who have not had a serialization yet. The artwork is like pretty polished and like together from the beginning, whereas sometimes there is a journey with a Jump title, and I think that also reflects in Jump, like first arcs of series and finding identities as they go. So I think, yeah, maybe that's also another distinction I've kind of made in my head between the magazines. Whereas I think Sunday loves its returning big names, and yeah, they have some other like little quirks that they have on their side as well.
Yeah, and I think also, even to the point, I would say like Rudo even looks a little bit like Soul from Soul Eater, doesn't he? I think he does. Soul Eater Evans, the co-lead of the male lead in Soul Eater. Well, there's several leaders, but like you have several major characters there that are all. But like if you look at like the male characters like Black Star and Soul, I think that Rudo has a very Soul Eater look to him actually. But then that's not too surprising considering as how again she was his assistant and I think the influence there is probably quite understandable.
Yeah,
Um,
I was going to
so
say, I
you
think
were yeah.
in terms of character designs as well. While we're talking about that, I feel like what Kei Urana brings, like you said, she did have a couple of one shots before the serialization, but she was also pretty popular and well known online as a Twitter like artist, like fan art, and I think it was kind of a big deal that she was actually doing a serialization because so many people were familiar with just
Mm.
the artwork she would post. So it's like, okay, now we're gonna like put a narrative to this and see what that's going to be like. As it's turned out, her artwork has never dipped in the weekly serialization, so she's very talented in
No,
that regard.
no, it's
Um,
definitely, yeah. All right, let's before we get into the more specific stuff with character and then spoilers, let's talk a little bit about sales. I've noticed in looking at the charts with this that it started out pretty strong. It hit a peak around volume 5, volume 6, maybe 35,000 first week sales, which for a non-jump title at that stage of its growth is very good. And it's doing fine now, but it definitely that was definitely a plateau situation. It's come down some from that. Do you think that's just kind of a normal progression, and the anime will theoretically reverse that, or do you think there's some specific reason within the writing itself that the sales have seemed to have dipped some for the last few volumes?
I don't know if it's hard to like pinpoint a reason why it could have dipped, but yeah, in terms of physical sales, it is down to like 20, less than 20K, in its first month for the new volumes, which is not amazing. I mean, it's still better than a lot of other titles, but in reading it, this feels like the sort of series where you're like, oh, this should be a big hit. Like this should be, uh, I could envision this selling 100K plus per volume and like having a proper fandom fan base behind it. I'm just curious to see maybe that will happen with the anime. I think if it does get a boost, considering where it is right now, if it even gets to that level of like 100K, that would be like proportional to where it is at. That'd be a really really good boost.
Mm.
Um, I maybe at the beginning of the series thought its ceiling was much higher than it's turned out to be so far. Yeah, I don't think that necessarily reflects on the quality of the series, but maybe just a little surprising that this hasn't clicked totally with like a larger fan base as I thought.
Let me ask you an impossible question, but I'll ask it anyway. What do you think the sales would look like if this were in Weekly Jump? Where do you think the sales would be right now? Because
Mm,
I've always felt like it would have been a pretty big hit right out of the gate if it were a Jump series, because I think it checks a lot of boxes for Jump hits. So it's not that it's running anonymously where it is, but no magazine has the penetration that Weekly Jump has. And there's sort of like this sense with Jump that you're always like, there's always like this hunt is always on for that next star, that next meteor. And I feel like if it would have gotten some of that momentum behind it, if it were in Jump, I think obviously the sales would be bigger. I mean, no one's going to dispute that, but how much bigger is a question. Would you even care to hazard a guess what you think they might be?
if it, my prediction maybe would be maybe not that far off where it is now because like there are titles in the magazine that are considered relatively safe that sell if you sell like 15 to 20K, which is around the level where Gachiakuta is now, at like 12, 13, 14 volumes, wherever it's at, then you're kind of good. You're safe at least. Like the hits definitely sell like double or triple that naturally, even before an anime. Um, but then yeah, even other ones that are doing relatively well, like something like Akane Banashi, that has had its own plateau pre-anime. It used to sell quite a bit more, and then now it's down to like 40K. So maybe Gachiakuta would be around that level, but even if it
Mm.
was doing the numbers that it has done, I think it actually probably still would have survived in what is like the
Oh,
standard of Weekly Shonen Jump.
I think it would have survived. I think the only question to me is, would it already be a hit? And I guess there's no way we'll ever know that. Even something like Dan had a plateau in sales before the anime hit. So, and Dan is a bigger seller than Gachiakuda, obviously. But I think a plateau at that 8, 9, at that 10, 11, 12 volume level is not unusual. I don't think it represents uh, so much a deterioration as so much as sort of a part of a natural pre-anime cycle that a lot of like mid seller series go through. I do think if the anime is as wowzers trousers as it looks like it could be, I think the manga could get a pretty big boost. I could easily see triple, like 60K, 70K. It certainly would not shock me to see it get to that level. Now, 60, 70K is not a kaiju, but for a non-jump shonen, 60, 70K is a pretty big hit. So I think the production committee, the publisher, would be very, very happy if that happened. But it's definitely a series where I'm going to be watching volume sales with extreme interest because I'm very, very curious to see where this goes.
Yeah, all these things are relative as well, because this is starting at a lower level. Anything that it does get is going to, like, percentage wise, be a good boost. But then I also just feel like maybe it is just the modern climate of the industry where we're at. I think a few years ago, if there was a potential like kaiju, like you say, that was going to get an anime, then people would expect, oh, this is going to be at like 200, 300K per volume. I just don't think that really happens much nowadays. I think you can count the amount of new series getting to that level in one hand. Um, and it's also the factor of the increase of digital sales that we are pretty, it's pretty anonymous information in terms of what we can
Yes.
actually gauge. So from my understanding, we might have actually already passed the point where the ratio of digital is higher now to physical, but we have no way of knowing. All we can see is like the physical industry is overall going down, but there's still some series that are rising despite that. So yeah, and then you look at things like even like the recent Jump titles, Sakamoto Days, like the needle pretty much didn't move much at all with the anime adaptation. Witch Watch, similarly, it's like a fine boost, but it's nothing major. And then you've got something like Elusive Samurai, which relative to where it was at, it kind of rebounded to like a good place, but it's still not gone past where the first like two or three volumes got to. So yeah, maybe it is just part of ever like adjusting expectations to what is realistic at this current stage.
Well, also, Elusive Samurai is kind of a unicorn case, I think, where you had a mangaka coming off an absolute monster hit. And I think that the sales from the first couple of volumes largely reflected the massive, massive, massive popularity of Ass Class. So I don't think Elusive Samurai ever getting back to that level was in the cards. But yeah, there are you do occasionally see you will see reports of like total volume sales for series which include the digital. So those numbers are not impossible to find, but you don't see them reported like on a weekly basis or anything like that. So it's a lot harder to track. But yes, as you said, some a series like, for example, the one that I love, Bokuyaba, the digital sales have been bigger than physical sales for almost since the beginning with that. So a lot depends on the series itself and some production, some publication. Some publishers have different ratios of physical to digital media. Jump is kind of like almost the last old school bulwark of the physical media. It's like having a copy of Jump is, that's almost like it's an eponymous thing in Japanese culture. The businessman gets on the train with Jump, the kid brings Jump to school. It's just that physical copy of Jump is just such an institution in Japanese life.
I
I
mean, do you
think
see
that the
that day to day?
yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Jump is. I think Jump is. There are other physical magazines that still sell, but I think there's something about that physical copy of Jump that keeps it going longer than I think that's sort of like. And yes, digital sales are important for Jump series, but the physical sales seem to be a bigger part of the equation with them than with anybody else. And I think there is a certain cachet factor. It's just it's such a habitual thing for people. So that's how I see it. All right, let's jump into characters here, and then we'll go into spoilers. But let's talk about Rudo as the main character. Rudo, as I say, is early teens. I think around 14 when the series starts. Kind of has stereotypical shonen male lead story, wrongly accused, yanked out of his comfortable, if impoverished life, one that he was at least had like comfort level in, the death of someone close to him that he has to sort of act out, he has to live to redeem that person and himself. So there are a lot of familiar elements with him. I think he stands out as we talk about that cool factor. The character design with Rudo is really interesting. He has incredibly expressive eyes, I have to say. His eyes are some of the best eyes in shonen. He has an innocence to him that I think is very appealing. Yet he also has a he has a it's funny, he's an interesting combination of innocence and almost a preternatural maturity to him that seems to belie his physical stature and his age. I think he's very effective as a lead. I think he's someone that's very easy to identify with. There's always a syndrome with male leads where they can become almost accessory to the story at times, as the supporting characters maybe have a little more freedom to kind of be flashy. And I think there is an element of that with Gachiakuta sometimes, where he has to be the anchor and the other characters have a little more opportunity to be the kites, as it will. But on the whole, I think he's very effective as a main character because I think A, he has a great look to him, and B, I think his story is very relatable, and I think his personality is such that he comes across, his reactions seem pretty believable most of the time, at least to me. Do you have any general thoughts on Rudo as a main character?
I think Rudo's quite fun. I think like what you describe, he is kind of a combination of various different tropes, and I think maybe that's. Mm, we'll discuss it when spoiler territory, but I think maybe that's kind of something that goes throughout the series for me. Whereas maybe I've not yet found like the completely unique perspective of what it's trying to say, other than like delivering aesthetically all these things in very interesting ways. And I think maybe what I like most about him, a lot of shonen comedy can be just not good, and sometimes I've said this before with Battle Shonen especially, sometimes I just ignore that it's there because it just feels like it's being added because the author just wants to get their kick every few pages. But I feel like Rudo, as this fish out of water, is a funny dynamic with all these other characters around him. And it's not necessarily that anyone's a straight man in the series because everyone's just a bit kooky and strange, and having him react to that is always quite fun. But I think I do like the contrast of him seeming quite bullish, and like physically he seems quite intimidating and like that sort of character, but emotionally he is quite restrained and awkward, and yeah, he's quite closed off and unfamiliar with a lot of things. So seeing him jump between the difference between how he's physically presented and how he actually thinks and acts, yeah, it's fun.
It's interesting that you describe him as physically intimidating. He is a physically strong person. I mean, he does have he is kind of a pugnacious is a word I would use, but I also find him quite fragile physically. He looks like a homeless kid you'd see on the streets of Tokyo or something. He has that look to him, kind of slightly haggard, and he has a bit of a stray cat look to him. Norineko. He's a bit haggard, thinner than some of that is his age. He's at that awkward tweener stage, but he has some of that thinner than he should be in some places, and again, I think there's something contrasting in a lot of him, his personality, his physicality. You see a lot of seemingly oppositional things in him at the same time, if you know what I'm saying. His personality wise, the physical look to him, like you can look at him and say he's kind of physically intimidating, and I can look at him and say he's a little bit fragile looking, and neither one of us is wrong. And I think that's sort of a testament to the way both to the way he's drawn and to the way he's written. And of course, the way an author writes a character very much influences the way we see that character physically. and I think that's true in all manga, but I think it's certainly true with Rudo. Let me ask you on the supporting characters. It's a big supporting cast, as you said. They're all pretty much all, with one or two exceptions, they're pretty much all like seriously kooky. I talking about favorite supporting characters. I really like Kuro, the information broker. He has one arc where he's like a really well. They named it the information broker arc, so I guess he would. But he has one arc where he's really prominent. But he's a presence in other times. I think he's really funny. I think he's really interesting. He's probably my favorite among the supporting cast. But there are supporting cast members we see a lot more of than him. Is there any particular supporting character that you especially like?
I have another character who we'll talk about in the spoiler territory who comes into prominence around the same time, which is Follo. But I'm pretty sure even if the anime is going to be too core, he's just going to be a guy that's just going to be there for a while and not really give much of an
Yep.
impression. So you're talking really, really recent stuff that has made him actually my favorite character in the series. But I think, funnily enough, looking over them, despite like you say, and like I've said, there being so many kooky, strange characters that Rudo interacts with, I kind of like the everyday man, the more normal characters like Follow, for example. But I've always enjoyed Gris from the beginning. The fact that he doesn't have these powers that everyone else does, but he sticks to the supporting role. But he just feels like such a grounded character, especially someone that I feel like Rudo needs from the beginning of the series. And yeah, throughout every arc that he's been involved with, there are characters that get more spotlight than him, but I just feel like he has a nice grounding presence amongst all these weirdos.
Yeah, I like him too, and I do tend to like the normal characters. Yeah, the way you describe him with his sort of accepting who he is makes an interesting contrast with well, all right. So before we talk about that contrast, we're going to
Much to
jump into,
discuss.
if you don't want the spoiler section, then this is obviously the point to flip over to Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend or whatever other podcast you listen to. But so let's talk about Follow a little bit. So it's sort of a nice segue. Follow is a character who doesn't seem contented with who he is. He's a supporting character who, in literally and figuratively, on both sides of the fourth wall, he's a supporting character. In fact, there's one section where there's this talks about the main character, and then with Follow's case is something he could never be. But he's not, unlike Gris, he's not happy with that. He desires to be something more. And as we get to know him and get to know his backstory, we begin to understand why he turned out the way he did and why he feels the way he does. And I think it's fair to say that once we see the character who inspired and drove him in his past, that character probably bears some similarities to Rudo. Wouldn't you agree? More of a gregarious personality, certainly, but there is something there that puts me in mind of him. Follow is an everyman character who represents, unlike Gris, who represents the everyman, who wants to be the main character. So he has, I think, an inherently dynamic role to play in the story. And as you say, in the more recent chapters that unfortunately the anime won't get to in the first two cores, but will, I think, if assuming it gets a sequel, it'll get to those eventually. He becomes, I think it's fair to say that at the point where we're at with the manga, it looks like his role is going to continue to kind of expand and be major as we go forward. So talk a little bit about why you particularly like Follow as a supporting character.
Yeah, I think Follow kind of came out of nowhere for me intentionally, up until the point where he had this spotlight and he was joining the recent mission where he got more prominence. I kind of actually forgot that he was a character and that he had any presence in the series. Low key, I kind of thought he was a new character for a minute, and then I was like, oh wait, yeah, he has been there, but he's just not had a prominent role whatsoever. there is like a meta aspect to it where like he wants to be elevated to main character status. And yeah, I do think that once you know his backstory, you can see how Rudo is bringing back this trauma of like someone who wants to aspire and like someone who's like better than him, and seeing, I think it's this duo, this dynamic between that duo of Rudo and Follo, where Follo sees Rudo as just getting everything easy, like things are just happening to him, and like he, because he is the main character, he has that prominence and that push, and Follow feels purposeless and not with and without power. When you see him break down and have what to me felt is very true emotional reactions to Rudo, considering that Rudo is his ally and he was fighting with him against another foe, but Follow couldn't
Mm.
help himself and be like, "How dare you tell me to step back and not fight?" Like this, I want this to be my moment as well. Like you don't get to just decide when you're the main character and you jump in and save the day. Like I don't want you to save me. I want to be the one saving people as well. Yeah, it came from absolutely nowhere, and I was like, Jesus Christ, this character has like this like real heart to what he's saying. Like I can feel the passion in his intentions and like his drive. And there was a moment where I was like, is he going to have this tragic end to him? This like reaching out for power so much that he loses himself in the process. Uh yeah, I like how it's turned out for him as well, because now he's going to presumably continue on this arc of now having some form of power and how he deals with that, and how he changes and having that. But just having him still be around, and that dynamic he has with Rudo, where there's like, I don't know, it's quite thorny. It's just like engaging to see their back and forth, and how there's like respect for them, especially respect them for each other, especially Rudo. Rudo never has these negative feelings for Follow, but it's very different the other way around. But then, of course, Rudo doesn't have to feel that because he's already in the superior position in terms of
Right.
power and purpose. Yeah, just
Yeah,
engaging stuff from on all corners for me.
I actually thought that was really interesting too. That chapter, and that because basically, they're having an argument. When they should be fighting to save their lives, and because of Follo's reaction, they're having like kind of a typical high school spat with each other. I thought that Rudo's reaction to that was kind of very emblematic of who he is as a person, because he almost he like doesn't understand why Follow, he literally does not understand why Follow is so upset. And I think that almost makes it worse for Follow, because he wants Rudo to be pissed at him, and he wants Rudo to disrespect him and all this. And it's not even active disrespect. It doesn't occur to him, Rudo, to that he's acting superior to Follow, because it's just the natural order of things, and he's a little bit emotionally, his emotional intelligence is not high. He has a little bit of trouble reading human emotions and expressing his own emotions, and I think that makes it worse for Follow, of course, because he wants Rudo to react to him the way he reacts to Rudo, and Rudo is just, that's not the way he's wired. He doesn't work that way. And so, the two of them, like I said, having this kind of typical teenage boy verbal fisticuffs with each other. And like one of the other, I forget which it was, but another one of the other ones comes along and says, "What the fuck are you doing? What are you doing fighting with each other? You're supposed to be, we're supposed to be taking on a deadly enemy here." And I thought that was kind of a very funny moment. And it, as you said, that didn't end in. It looked like for a while like it was going to end in very dark fashion, but it was. Yeah, I thought that was very kind of artfully played by Irana. I thought she did a very nice job with that chapter.
Yeah, it was. I think it was Gris who was in between them there, and
Yeah,
yeah, just three characters that I really enjoy. So that whole like little arc we had there, plus Loki, you got the main villain just like sitting there watching it all happen.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
just like very fun group of characters. But I think what's also because you say teenage boy, you're not incorrect, but I think Follo is 19, whereas you can no, yeah, Follo is 19, whereas Rudo is 14, 15. So then that slight maturity age gap, inferiority complex from Follow, I think, is just heightened even more when you add that in. So that is my favorite stretch of the series, and the fact that it's been quite recent gives me hope that we haven't peaked in terms of the potential of the series so far.
Yeah, I definitely don't think we have. I want to talk a little bit about the power system because this is a battle shonen. I think the power system here is very interesting, but it's not like super simple. It's pretty. It's very intricate. It's very myriad and complex. There's a lot of different levels to it. There's a lot of different. There's a lot of different substrata, if you will. I have thought at times it even gets a little bit too complicated, but then at the same time, I think to myself, well, you're a Hunter fan. You can't really say that. But do you feel it? How do you feel about the power system generally? I think it definitely plays into the cool factor. It is really interesting. But have you ever had any moments where you've thought like she goes for a little bit too much here? She makes it a little too complicated, or do you feel like it's kind of perfect the way it is?
I think it's a good power system. I feel like the basic rules of it are quite grounded in like the object and the person and bringing something out of it, and I think it allows Kei Urana to just kind of go wild from that point, which is why it can seem so varied from character to character. But I will always take that as opposed to I don't hate Black Clover, just to like throw that name out there, but that is a series where like characters are throwing out spells, but like they have like affinities towards a certain type of spell casting, so they kind of all fall under an umbrella. But really, you're just like it does sometimes feel like each new spell is just something that's just been created that is like, oh, this is just the 10th variation of throwing ice at someone. Whereas this one, it feels like there is some personal attachment and to the character, and this is this is a funny one because we're in spoiler discussion territory, but there's even things that I can't give spoilers for because, like you say, there's so much Bleach in this series, and there's so much Bleach in this series that you've already identified in the first arc of Bleach where things are becoming obvious in other series, but in Soul Society arc, you'll see even more. And there are things that I can't give away at this point, but I'm like, duh, this is the most similar to like Bleach Power System, Zanpakuto's, um, basically the connection between a weapon and a person and how that ties in with the characterization of someone. But I do think, if I'm completely honest, maybe I'm biased, but I do think Bleach is incredible at that, and having the power system be directly in relation to who the character is. But I think what Kei Urana does here is take that influence and is like, okay, these cleaners, these givers, they have to fight with a weapon that represents them in some way. And like you see with Follow with his hammer, I mean, it has to like it's at its best when it ties to them very specifically.
Yeah, and that certainly ties specifically to him. He named it after someone. So uh, let's talk about Tamsy, who is the I've seen it spelled with an S and a Z, but he's I don't know what he is. Is he the antagonist? Is he the villain? Yes, but I've seen the name Hisoka dropped in relation to Tamsy and his relationship with Rudo. He's an interesting one in that he's acting in a sense as the villain of the story, or at least the antagonist, but we don't really know that much about why he's doing the things he's doing and why he's so obsessed with Rudo in the first place. We kind of know exactly why Hisoka feels the way he feels about Gon, because Hisoka never has had an unexpressed thought in his life. He tells you everything he's thinking because he has absolutely no shame. And Togashi loves to have Hisoka, revel in his own weirdness. Whereas with Tamsy, we do get his inner monologue at times, but it tends to be in his snark voice, where he kind of masks his true intentions and his true feelings. So let me ask you, just in general terms, what do you make of him as a character? I mean, obviously he's villainous in at least some sense, but what are your general thoughts on him?
Okay, I'm gonna answer this by asking you a question.
Yes.
Do you know any of who the villains are in Bleach? You can just
No,
say
not
yes
if
or
they
no.
were.
Yeah.
No, only in the first, only with as was expressed in the first arc that we covered in an earlier episode.
Okay, first of all, that's great to hear. I'm glad that you don't know. Um, to which I will just say he gives a vibe of a very specific character in Bleach, especially in the way that there's this sort of emotional distance between, even though you're getting some insight into his thoughts, you don't really understand the full picture, but he definitely loves the idea of like, it seems like he's enjoying this toying with Rudo and these other people along the way. Yeah, he's a funny one. I can revisit
Oh,
this
wait a
when.
minute. I think I do know who you're talking about now that you mention it. There is a character now that you've mentioned this, a Bleach character that I did at some level become. Are his initials SA by any chance?
Oh, yes, they are. Oh,
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
sad if you already knew that he was who he was, because if you were going to read that and not know, that would have been really fun. But yes, I see in
Yeah.
that character, I see a lot of Tamsy.
Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting. I will say maybe I know something I wasn't supposed to know, but yeah, at some level, I like I said, at some level that seeped into my subconscious, and I'm like, oh yeah, I do know kind of who he's talking about.
I mean, it's hard not
But
to know who that
yeah,
character is, I suppose,
yeah,
even just in the
yeah.
peripheral.
Let's talk about another sub character plot here, which is, obviously, Gachiakuta is not a romance. In fact, it's one of the least romantic uh, shonen I know. But like most battle shonen, there can always be a little bit of an undercurrent. In fact, early in the series, Rudo has a puppy love crush on someone, but I think it's pretty clear that's going nowhere at this point. So of all there are a pretty big of the cleaners, the support givers, everybody. We meet a lot of characters. A lot of them are girls, not much older than him. Is there any particular character you feel like there might be some romantic chemistry potentially long term with Rudo? And why is it Amo?
Well, it probably would be Ammo. I don't think it'd be real. It just doesn't give that vibe to me. Honestly, it's not really something I've thought about much. There is that awkwardness from Rudo, and like, I could get that he just doesn't. It would also be funny to see him like learn how to like talk to girls in that way if the story goes down that route. But yeah, it would probably be Ammo. Though if that's a funny one, because Ammo is actually maybe one of my least favorite characters in the series, and her introduction arc is one that just doesn't work for me entirely. I think maybe she's in a better place in the narrative now. She's more enjoyable. I know you're even more resistant to this archetype or this sort of character than I am, but she kind of gave like potential waifu vibe, that sort of like projection onto her. So I'm not desperate to see some romance happening, but if it is going to be anyone, it probably will be those two.
Well, the other reason I kind of think that is I don't have strong feelings about her one way or the other, but I kind of felt like in Rudo, he's not someone who's frequently expresses emotions in an expansive way, other than like like when he has his kind of shonen tiger cub rage moments. Those obviously he expresses, but other emotions you don't see. He tends to bottle those up, and where it seemed to me that where she was concerned, he was more expressive. You know what I'm saying? Maybe hinting that even if he's unaware of it himself, which I would say he almost certainly is, that he was feeling something a little bit romantic towards her that was maybe would explain why he was more expressive of his emotions when she was in danger, when and trying to help
Hmm.
her than he maybe would be in some cases. I felt like he was betraying maybe that he was feeling something a little more there than he was aware of.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely potential for that considering, and it makes sense. They both feel like the most emotionally stunted characters. So
Mm.
I can see that being like a connection between them, and then very recent chapters with To Lily. I think there's some. She gives a little reaction at one point, being like, "Oh, I didn't realize you were that type of person, Rudo." Um, so yeah, it's cute. Again, I've not thought about it too much, but I wouldn't be mad.
Picture the typical 14, 15-year-old boy being awkward about romantic things. He's that, and then even exceptionally awkward and emotionally stunted, even for a 14, 15-year-old boy. So I think he's at the zygotic stage when it comes to that sort of thing. But I think if that were ever to progress with any of the existing cast, she's the one that makes the most sense for me to happen. Okay, last thing I want to touch on before we get into recommendations and scores and all that good stuff that we do is just to talk about the kind of the overarching plot and the mythology and like the Watchman. We have the Watchman series, which is a big plot point. We have the Watchman itself, which is a character which Rudo has seen. It's the only character that lives in this realm. As far as we know, it's the only character that lives in between where Rudo came from and where he was thrown to when he was thrown off the edge of the world. So obviously, the Watchman is important. I think that's very, very clear. And I feel like we've seen some indications in the last 10 or 15 chapters that this could be like the future of our real world that we're looking at, that there's some connections directly to the real world, as we would call it, and that Rudo, there's been talk about Rudo's ancestor, and I feel like she's trying to maybe connect some dots here to almost in a post-apocalyptic sort of way, that not that any of these people would be aware of 21st century Japan or Earth in the sense that we think of it, but that somehow or another we are looking at the future. That's the vibe I'm getting at this point in the story, and let's have you weigh in on your feelings about Watchman and the general mythology of it, and whether you see any connections to the real world.
You know, I actually hadn't really pieced that together as where we're going, but that does make sense considering you've got this contrast of what feels like post-apocalyptic wasteland that the characters live in, and then this upper floating city society we have. So, yeah, I can see that being the case. I'm not sure in the Watchmen series. It does there are hints of it building up to it, but like the actual naming of it does come quite a bit into the story. And considering it's going to be like the overall plot driver going forward, it feels like I haven't actually formed a full opinion of it. I've not. I'm still in a wait and see moment, but I would also say to that, it's not. Maybe that also means it hasn't really gripped me. I'm not like, oh, I can't wait to see what this thing is. Like, I'm just like, okay, trying to see the pieces come together, and we did see that with, especially more with the information broker, but it feels like maybe something that would be rewarded with like a reread, like in hindsight.
The
I
hints.
yeah, I trust that Kei Urana knows what she's planning and she's got it all plotted out. So I'm just curious to see what the vision actually is because I can't really picture it right now.
Do you think Tamsy has any direct knowledge or links to Watchmen, the Watchmen series?
Yeah, I think so, but I also feel like Tamsy isn't going to be the final villain. Tamsy gives
I agree.
me Tamsy gives me like he wants to be the final villain, but there's something more that will overtake. And yeah, I don't know how long the series is going to be. We're like 130, 40-ish chapters at this point. Maybe in my head, and I was envisioning like maybe like 250, 300-ish range, which is like a very decent length for a battle shonen. I still think we've got quite a bit to go through.
I agree with you. I feels like the story is maybe half over. Is kind of the vibe I would get. If the anime is successful enough to give the manga a decent boost and to get itself sequel seasons to the point where it becomes a full adaptation, and everyone is agreed that she should write it for as long as she wants to write it, I feel like there's a 250, 300 chapter arc feel to this. That's how it plays for me. So I'm totally on board with you with that. It doesn't feel like she's anywhere close to the wind up stage at this point, but I does feel like maybe, a lot of these stories, you feel like it's like the universe expands to a certain point and then it starts to contract. It's like exposition, question, 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 mystery, 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 and then at some point there's like a shift change, and it starts to be explanation, explanation, and you start to see things contract. But even once it comes, I think you're around the halfway point of a series. So, all right, okay, so let's get into the recommendation section. And I will say, now that I know what you're recommending, the series that we're each recommending are really the two utterly logical series that would be recommendations for Gachiakuta, because it's something of a hybrid of the two of them, really. The series I'm recommending, big shock, is Bleach, by Tite Kubo, and it is really self-explanatory. I mean, the vibe of it, the aesthetic of it, the story-wise, it's quite different, but the vibe of it is, the aesthetic of it is so totally Bleachy. If you like Gachiakuta, which is the whole point of a recommendation, Bleach is, it's the logical, to me. There's two logical places I would send you, and Bleach is one, and you're doing the other. It just, we've already discussed it ad nauseum. I don't need to do it again here, but it is the aesthetic of the series is so Bleach that it's almost impossible not to see it if you're familiar with both series. Even me being only familiar with the first part of Bleach, as you said, maybe the least Gachiakuta like, or the least Bleachy part of Bleach, it still is like totally Gachiakuta. So that's my pick, is Bleach, and your pick is going to be.
Well, my pick also comes from another Kubo, Atsushi Ookubo. As you say, already mentioned him, Soul Eater. She was his assistant for Fire Force, which I actually haven't read, and I'm not desperate to read it, so I can't recommend that one. But I just feel like on an aesthetic level, clearly there's a follow through. There's some inspiration come from there. I'm still kind of waiting for what the narrative distinction is in it. So which I'm hoping maybe the Watchman series is going to really bring forth. I enjoy it a lot, but I do think it is predominantly the ratio of like my enjoyment comes from presentation and aesthetic, and
Mm.
I think I have similar feelings with Soul Eater in that regard.
And I will say, Soul Eater gets a very funny cameo in chapter 133. There's in fact several manga get funny call outs in chapter 133. It's one of the funnier sequences in the manga. And I will say this: it is, as Battle Shonen go, I think the comedy really works. When she goes for comedy, I think she can be very effective. There's some very funny moments, and she's capable of drawing some really funny reaction shots and visual stuff. It's not like over the top comedic in the way something like Elusive Samurai or Rurouni Kenshin can be. But when she does go comic, I think she's quite effective at it. So yes. Let's talk about scores, and this time I will let you go first. What is your score for Gachiakuda?
So my score has actually probably jumped around depending on what point of the series I'm at. I would say it was actually maybe its highest during its introduction stages. I think it's got a really, really strong beginning, like I say, so that will come through in the anime. And then there was a point where it was kind of a little bit of a lull for me. The Follo stuff really brought me back in, being like, okay, there's something still in the tank here. So it put it back up to like somewhere in between. So right now, my score for it is 81.
I see. I see. Very
I think
interesting.
my high for it at its best was probably like 85, 86, and my low was probably like 76. So I'm somewhere in the middle of that journey. Yeah.
Okay. My score for Gachiakuda, and I'm gonna go radical on this, is 81.
Oh, you're copying
I
me.
well, I wish I could say that was true, but I haven't wavered as much as you, but I was probably, I agree with you. I think there was kind of a shock and awe factor with the first 15 or 20 chapters, where the cool factor was so prominent that that probably would have been my high water mark. But I never felt lull. Maybe a tiny bit, but I think that with a series that's so reliant on the cool factor, inevitably, once you get used to the cool factor, it's less impactful because it's like, oh yeah, that's cool. But it never stops being cool. It's just that you just get less impacted by it. But I think it's been pretty consistent actually for 130 some chapters. And I agree with you. It's a little bit unformed in terms of what its final form is going to be and what she's going for here, what her ultimate goals of the series are. And I think I would include Rudo's character arc with that. But I do think that it's very accomplished. It has a very well laid out and well thought out, power system. I think the artwork is evidentially superb, and I think I just feel like she's a very concise writer. She doesn't waste a lot of she doesn't waste a lot of panels. She doesn't waste a lot of dialogue. Everything she writes tends to feel pretty relevant. You don't feel like there's a lot of fluff here. So I'm pretty comfortable with 81, but mine is kind of an 81 with a bullet. Where is if she connects a couple dots here in the way I'm hoping she will, I could see it spiking. If she takes the series, if she knows where she's going and that's a good direction, I could easily see the series leaping by several points over the course of its final arc.
Can I ask a
But for
question?
right now, 81 is where I am. Yes.
Would you say of the currently being published Battle Shonen, this is your favorite now that My Hero Academia is no longer running?
Well, let's think on that. What other ones have we discussed? You've got. Do you consider Elusive Samurai a battle shonen?
No, I don't.
Okay. What Jump series currently running do you consider battle shonen? Kagurabachi for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
Kagurabachi, Ichi the Witch, Hunter x Hunter. Well, Hunter x Hunter actually. That Asterix running.
let's. Yeah. If you asked me to score Ichi the Witch off the top of my head, based on a much smaller number of chapters, I suspect it would get a higher score than Gachiakuta does.
Okay, fair.
But it would be pretty close at this point. I'm trying to think if there's anything that's running in another magazine that I would consider a true battle shonen that I would rank higher. And off the top of my head, I'm not sure there is one. No, so it may very well be. That may be something I think about and come back to you, tomorrow or the next day and say, God damn it, I should have said, Hanyarara, that's actually the one. But yeah, it might very well be. It could very easily be. What would you say is your currently favorite battle shonen that's currently running?
I mean, if you want to count Hunter x Hunter, then it's Hunter x Hunter.
Well, I don't.
Okay, fair. After that, then I would say um, it is One Piece. That's another
Okay,
very,
fair enough.
very obvious answer. And then I would say probably Sakamoto Days is up there.
I even think, and Sakamoto Days is too, although it's it's a different kind of battle shonen, but I get it is a battle shonen. There's no question structurally it is one, so that's a fair point. I definitely like this better than Sakamoto Days, but I haven't read much of the manga of Sakamoto Days, so that's probably not a fair comparison on my part. Okay, so that's our discourse on Gachiakuda. We both gave it the same score. We both are fans and have been fans for a long time, and we're both looking forward to the anime. I think with a lot of anticipation, and not only to the anime itself, but to see what impact the anime has on a series we both feel has a lot of commercial potential that's sort of untapped at this point. And whether that anime will be the thing that sort of closes the circuit and takes the commercial power to the next level. We'll see. It'll be very interesting to find out. If nothing else, it's a Bones anime of a series that I really like, and I'm just looking forward to seeing that on screen. And another one, of course, we could talk about as on the battle shonen is Dan too, as a currently running battle shonen. And I think I like Gachiakuda better than Dan. I don't know what you would say, but
Me
I do
too.
think that
Yep.
Dan got a terrific anime and ongoing terrific anime, and the anime is one that maybe at some point in the future we'll get a chance to talk about comparing Dan anime and manga. Who knows? But in any event, I just want to say thank you, Summer, for joining us. Thank you to our readers as always for tuning in. whether that be on YouTube or any of our myriad podcast outlets. Actionables, like, comment, subscribe. Very much appreciated. As I say this every time, but if you comment, you can pretty much bank that we'll reply to it. We love that sort of thing. Whether that be on LIA, I'll certainly respond to it, but even here on YouTube, we like to respond too. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you, Samu. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you know how I like to sign these off. So I will. Well, should I say it? Oh, I don't know whether I should say it. Okay. Stay frosty.